I know that now. I know what I did. My
Oh
true
yeah,
crime was inattention.
yeah. What the answers I was looking for were right in front of me the entire time. It was that woman and them two girls.
Yeah, that's the one. We can talk
Yeah,
about that more later. But I wanted to
yeah.
ask you something and relay a bizarre dream that I had.
Please.
Yeah. So, first of all, what do you think dreams signify? Do they have any relevance, do you think? Do you get into that at all?
Yeah. Just looking at you know Carl Jung stuff, and then specifically, and then
Right.
looking at thinking about what I've read of Campbell and all that stuff, and a little bit of Freud. But yeah, Jung, it basically seems like the all of the different emotions and thoughts and maybe problems, dreams, whatever, as they're sort of running while our human computer is in sleep mode. There's all this activity going on in our brains, and so we have these dreams, right? And then I don't know, maybe it seems like we're running a script, like like we're running a
Mm.
simulation in our brains,
So it's
trying
the
to work through the whatever is causes us conflict or pause.
so the script is running, but then the things in the
Like cat
script.
and mug.
You want to know
Yeah.
what? I made this.
Did you really?
I did. I did. Well,
Yeah,
I painted it. I painted it.
that's
Yeah.
great.
Yeah.
So,
What's my Chinese name?
what's the rough translation into English? Is there one?
No, no, there is. It doesn't really have a meaning. It's just like Luke, her. My
Cool.
wife's mother-in-law calls me. She doesn't know how to say my name, so she says Luke, her.
Yeah, you wait, your wife's mother-in-law
My
or your
wife's mother, my mother-in-law. My wife's mother-in-law would be my mother. Oh Jesus, I'm drinking coffee as well.
Good, good.
Got to compose myself. I have actually. I brewed an entire pot of coffee. I don't know why. Seriously, this is another thing I wanted to mention.
It's like, I've got this here, but just in case this thing goes south, I've got this here. So,
Oh, it's very funny. I don't know why. Um, right. So there's another thing I wanted to mention. As I was making coffee, I realized that I was making coffee for two, hence the giant pot of coffee. And then I thought, uh, where does the conscious mind take over from the subconscious mind now that
yeah.
we live in a place where meetings don't always mean meetings?
Mm.
You know, when the lower brain processes that there's a thing coming up, a conversation that's going to happen, or an arrangement, does it process that at a deep level that then sometimes
Mm.
doesn't let it sort of bubble up to the top? Because apparently it didn't. I subconsciously made you coffee, right? I did. And then I
That's
realized, oh, I made too much coffee. I don't need this much coffee. And then because I felt guilty, I sort of just brought it in and thought, well, I guess I could just get jacked on coffee. Uh, why not?
yeah.
So I don't know. What do you think
Huh.
about that?
That's interesting. Yeah.
Yeah.
I have no idea. It's funny you mentioned that part of the brain because with the kids I'm teaching right now, some of the content we're going through is the brain, and the bottom part of it is the brain stem, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it controls involuntary actions.
Mm-hmm.
Is the definition of the brain stem for them.
Yeah.
So, yeah,
The old reptilian part, right? Emotions. It's
man.
where emotions live.
Is it? I haven't seen Inside Out. Is that what that movie's about too?
They don't go into brain regions too
Okay.
specifically. It's sort of mind space. They don't. I don't think
Yeah.
they. No, they do a little bit. A little bit. They don't focus too much on the different regions, hippocampus, and so on. But you should
Yeah.
watch. You should watch the movie. Honestly, it is a thought-provoking movie.
Would you say Pixar finally or sort of went back to form with
Yeah.
it?
Yeah. Absolutely.
Cool.
Absolutely.
That's good.
Here's another thing. Do you hear that meowing?
No.
It's a high-pitched meowing sound.
Very, very, very faintly.
So while we're on the topic of the brain being sort of not being able to deal with reality as it is, my cat, this cat, the one that's meowing, she will grab a sock and protect it, and only meows when she has a sock in her mouth because she thinks it's a baby. And her evolutionary program has convinced her that this is her, for even if it's a 30-second period, this is her child, and it's dead, and she's mourning for it. It's pretty bizarre, and because she's clearly upset when she has it, because it's limp and it's kind of she went through the whole gestation period. Somehow her brain thinks it's all real. It's a simulation. It's very strange.
Do you think that maybe there's a parallel to the way that, if we, like, say you with your business or me with my art career?
Why are you putting that in quotes?
Because it's funny to me.
I think it's funny that you think it's funny.
And so
every time now, I feel like every time I just raise my cup to drink, it's sort of like I'm just mocking you just because I have this cat. I don't even need my face anymore.
Because clearly, if you painted that, your art career is much further along than the guy who's actually trying. Because it's a good painting job. But
it's a grumpy cat.
Yeah. It's Lou Kerr, right?
Yeah, Lou Kerr, yeah.
The grumpy cat.
Yeah.
So do you think that maybe if there's a parallel, in some sense, maybe we're under the illusion that those things are our creation and our babies, and if they get taken away from us, that it would be like a catastrophic. We would meow like a cat because it's catastrophic to us if those things fail or if they meet impediments. Does that make sense?
I think about it a lot, and it's almost like I feel like there's some sort of common thread here. We're jumping all over the place, but I think there's something here in common about how there's a deeper core that is pretty stable and sort of just runs all the time, and it knows what it's doing, and then there's sort of this wobbly consciousness layer on top of it, very much influenced by the deeper core, this sort of very steady tree trunk, hippocampus, whatever it may be, the interactions of the deeper reptilian brain, and so, for example, with the art career or whatever it is, think about people who make their entire life about repairing Teslas or about building tree houses. To anybody else, it doesn't matter. Nobody cares usually about anybody else's interests. But if you have wrapped your sense of value around it, the sense of value and where that comes from is probably from that core, that deep sort of primordial ancient brain where all of our emotions come from. And then the thing that it actually is, whether it's an art career or tree houses or business or whatever, doesn't really matter. It's not significant. It can be replaced. It's very interchangeable. It's sort of like a dream. The machine is running, the code is running. The code has been running for hundreds of thousands of years. And then the pieces that get popped in that make up the story in the dream maybe came from yesterday.
Yeah.
And they don't matter. That's interesting.
And Jung would sort of elaborate on that and break it down to basically, from what I remember reading of this book right here, it says...
That one or that one? Is it that one or is it that one? Is it that one or that one? Or is it that one?
Let's see if
that
I can
one or
barely
that one?
tell.
Or that one?
It says Jung.
So it's that one.
Exactly. Yes.
I
precisely.
see. I can actually read it. Because you're great. Because you're great camera.
That one is anyway. That book, which was edited by Joseph Campbell, is a collection of just a few of the more important works from Jung's career, and he goes into all that stuff, and it's exactly like what you're saying, that sort of baseline programming is always running in the background, and it's ascending and descending. Oh, well, this is important and it's not important. It's almost like the emotions are looking for expression, and sometimes they get pushed back. Sometimes they don't get interpreted. Sometimes they show up in a way we can't understand. Sometimes they show up in a way we can't understand, and we use it to project our own identity. And that's how we effectively move through the world. And then sometimes we have to struggle with this thing we don't understand, otherwise known as the monster we don't know, that we have to descend into the abyss and deal with. Then we know it and can incorporate it. So yeah, I think that maybe.
So if there's something that's not there that the program needs to operate, then that would probably cause major imbalances and would cause, you know, deviant behavior like rapists and things like that. I would imagine there's some sort of, I mean, that drive to do those deviant things comes from somewhere. It doesn't come from nowhere. Maybe it's just a place, a hole in the code where there was no expression, no material for expression, and so something had to take its place and sort of went off on a bad trajectory.
There was a release valve, or there was something that needed release, that needed expression, and the machine couldn't find expression in a socially acceptable way, because maybe the human machine didn't know how. Maybe in the society it's in, that's not provided. And then it shows up in deviant behavior or things that make us want to put that person behind bars, away from society, away from the rest of us, so it doesn't break our sort of social machine.
So as we move closer to relationships by analogy, and we move closer toward substitutes, almost third-tier substitutes for real relationships, like eventually artificially intelligent spouses. And I talked about that on another episode with my friend. We talked about that. Or this, where we're not really talking with each other, but we are kind of, but in a way we're talking. I mean, I'm just sitting in a room by myself looking at a flat piece of glass.
Yeah.
Yeah. And eventually with virtual reality, I will go to a place to conduct business that's not a real place, and that the majority of the value of my life will, within probably a 20 or 30 year period, will happen in that space. In fact, my physical body is just reclined on some sort of like massage chair. Probably. So do you think that as we move, I think you'd probably agree that that's a future we're moving toward. Do you think that as we move farther toward that future, that the deeper things that the brain needs to operate with, that the material that it needs will be lacking, or will it just sort of take those things on and say, yeah, okay, VR, I'm cool with that, whatever, I can dig it, and then it's fine? Or are we going to have serious mental illnesses in the future?
I wonder if this has already happened before, that and somehow technology has, our love for the use of technology has superseded the lifestyle we had dictated that met the demands of our collective unconscious. For example,
whoa, say that again. That's deep. That's pretty heavy.
For example, tools. When imagine for however many hundreds of thousands, if not millions of years, whatever stage humanity was in, that it existed without tools, and it did everything without tools, and so life was built around an existence without tools. But then it figured out a tool, okay, and then there was some advantage that was attractive to using tools all the time, and so then life had to change. Everything changed around the utility of tools, and so that former way of living, it's kind of like now we've got the internet, we've got tools now, whereas before we didn't have the internet, for example. And so maybe the things that in the past example with the discovery of tools that would have been maybe looked on as aberrant, let's say, basically before the advent of tools, society had adapted to basically compensate and move along as it needed. But then when tools came along, everything changed. And so then society and humanity had to adapt to the existence of tools and the use of tools, and never going back to not having tools. So maybe we're sort of at that stage now, and it'd be interesting if we could to see, well, what the things that we're experiencing now that we think people do that are weird because they sort of break the social consistency,
or even
like the deviants of the criminals.
Well, or even let's just say meth addicts.
Okay. Yeah. Was there a parallel to a meth addict in prehistoric times, essentially. And then what happened? And if the meth addict, what they're doing now is basically compensating for some need that the campus needs, but society doesn't provide it anymore in the massive, as a massive collective. And so they have to venture off into this aberrant behavior towards meth.
Unintentionally, almost.
Sure. I could.
Almost by necessity. There's no other path, maybe.
Yeah, so the path of least possible resistance to that person fulfilling a compulsion is meth, right?
No, I understand exactly what you're saying. I'm trying to think of what a specific example of what that would be in the Neolithic period, but I'm having trouble coming up with a good hunter-gatherer analogy.
Yeah.
But I'm sure there is maybe something around cooking, that everyone was eating raw meat, right? Everyone was just ripping.
Did you watch that?
Ripping into antelopes, and then people started cooking, and that somehow dropped the bottom out for some people, and they just went rogue and became, I don't know, maybe they just started eating people. Who knows?
Yeah. Did you watch that? There's a guy, I just started listening to him in a Joe Rogan interview, William de Von Hippel.
I haven't listened to much Joe Rogan these days.
It's funny that those words just came out of your mouth, because that guy basically talks about the words that just came out of your mouth, sort of, especially with the raw diet, and talking about, well, with a raw diet, there's not the caloric availability is much lower compared to cooked food or cooked meat specifically. And so when cookery comes along, you have this massive explosion of nutrients now
No, it wasn't an explosion of nutrients, wasn't. I thought it was that cooking basically does the job of digestion. Cooking is digestion. And if you cook something, now you don't need as much energy to digest. And like if you watch primates sit around on trees, they're all sleepy all the time because they're eating so much, because they're spending all of their energy digesting. And then when cooking came along, basically it took out 70% of the need for digestion, and all of those energy resources could go into ballooning our brains, basically.
Yeah, and I think it's both. That in some cases cooking does unlock different nutrients, does make different things available to the human body, whereas raw doesn't. So, and it's both. And then you think about, well, the ease of digesting cooked food compared to uncooked food is much easier to digest.
Less energy intensive. Yeah. The resources can be diverted.
Yeah. But anyway, the guy, he talks a lot about that kind of stuff. It's just funny. All of these, you've got a small cup of your vice, and then a pot of it. I've got a small cup of my vice, and then a bottle of it. And then anyway, all these little parallels.
The wavelengths are lining up. We're reaching a resonance pattern. Something's gonna happen, man.
Yeah. I want to be there.
Yeah. What if we just converged and suddenly we were just across from each other? That would be cool.
Then we would be a movie by Ingmar Bergman called Persona.
Ooh, I haven't seen that one. I saw The Seventh Seal, but I haven't seen that.
Oh, love it. Oh, man, Ingmar Bergman, Seventh Seal, fantastic. I think maybe my favorite of his is The Hour of the Wolf.
I haven't seen that one either. I think I've only seen The Seventh Seal.
He's got some good stuff.
He's the oh no, suddenly I'm blanking. Who's the guy who did Eraserhead?
Oh, David? No.
Yeah, David Lynch. He's
David Lynch.
He's David Lynchian in a way. Surreal.
Yeah, I feel like Lynch goes even further. Did you see Eraserhead?
Yeah.
Okay.
I love David Lynch movies. I think he's a genius. Yeah.
I like him too. Yeah.
Have you ever seen the cartoons that David Lynch animated by himself?
No.
Oh my God! There's one where they're very violent and very poorly drawn. And there's one.
It's like my. It's like,
There's one where there's these two neighbors talking to each other across a fence, and one neighbor is just a very angry man, and they're trying to have a conversation, and there's this helicopter above, and then the whole cartoon is just this one angry neighbor like cursing at the helicopter, and he's just swearing at the helicopter for the entire episode. It's really bizarre, but it's quite funny because it captures something. There's something that he's capturing. He's good at capturing a specifically small part of a human thing that we've noticed before that we haven't really been able to explain, and then blowing it up to a huge size, making it noticeable. I've seen that neighbor. Oh yeah.
Anyway, so you said you were going to ask me a strange question or something. Was that the dream thing?
I think I was going to mention a dream that I had and see what you can make of it.
Let's do it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This is a dream I had last night. So I had a friend come over yesterday and brought me a birthday gift. And this is the gift. Great. It says Luke's Ideas. Yeah. Okay. And obviously it's empty. Obviously there's nothing in it. It's just, and it comes with
is that a metaphor?
A blank slate. And it's moleskin. Is it moleskine or moleskin? Moleskin, right?
I've always heard moleskin.
Comes with a rectangular pen, which is pretty cool. Writes very well. So I had a dream about this book. It's weird that I would have a dream about the thing the next day. Usually it's several days later. But I had a dream about this book. And I was opening up the book to write down an idea. It was going to be the first idea, and I was really excited to write it down. Bizarrely, the idea was not a good idea. It was a terrible idea because somehow I was connected with some sort of dictator. And this is very strange, but it's true. I was connected to some sort of dictator. Somehow I was his assistant or something. And he wanted to burn books. And I was going to write down in my book as the first entry, what if we boiled them instead? Somehow thinking maybe like we'd be able to get them back after the war or something. I don't know. Anyway, I opened the book and my wife had written on every page, but she just wrote a 0 on every single page. Every page had a 0 on it, and I just remember looking through every single page, going, "What is going on?" Yeah. And I don't remember what happened after that, but it just seemed to be filled with meaning. And I don't know what to make of it.
So you had a dream, and you had your book with you, and you were an assistant to a dictator who wanted to burn all the books. And so you wrote down...
I seem to have an idea that I wanted to still save the books.
Yeah, and so you said, what if we boil them instead? Because after the war you could save them. I wonder if...
Which obviously still probably wouldn't work. I don't think that would work, but... It seemed like a good idea at the time.
That effort is, in some ways, an attempt to maintain some sort of equilibrium that, okay, we can appease the dictators till that sort of flare-up is over, and then we can sort of reclaim what was lost.
And
then...
That's a good point. That sounds about right, yeah.
Because it seems like something Freud or Jung would say is that the dictator might be you, that there's some... dictator that has an aggressive desire that needs to be satiated. And so maybe that's a part of your personality, but then also part of your personality is the compensatory aspect that says, okay, well, we know this needs to be satisfied, but what if we sort of satisfy it in a way that isn't as destructive as it could be? And then with your wife...
That's a fair analysis. That's a fair analysis. I think that's a good way to break it down. Yeah.
And then with your wife writing 0 on every page.
She wrote 0 on every page of my book, rendering it unusable.
Was it?
I think sometimes there were squiggles instead of zeros, but I feel like it was mostly zeros on every page, a big 0 on every page. I think I remember seeing some where it was just sort of squiggled out. But there were no empty pages anymore. I couldn't write on anything.
So, by the way you just explained it, by the fact that you said, it seems like what you take from that is that you can't, that the book is now useless, that,
Yeah.
which means your ideas are useless, that it's an attempt to not let you pursue your ideas or to stop you from pursuing your ideas. So if there's a zero on it, if it was a number zero, that could be one thing. If it's a circle, that could also be sort of
it was
your.
somehow I knew it was the number zero. You know how you just know things? Because your brain is the thing producing it, so it often tells you what it is.
Yeah. And that's if you read any of these examples that these guys give of their case studies or of their psychoanalytic processes and examples, that's what they do is well, what does the dreamer, what is the meaning that they project onto what they've seen? So with a zero, I was thinking, okay, is it a zero or is it a circle? Because if it's a zero, that's one thing that's heavy with meaning. If it's a circle, that's another thing that's heavy with meaning.
Very
so
different,
it's interesting to try to,
So if it's a zero, what's that suggest, do you think?
I don't know. I mean, maybe the thing that I would project onto that is, okay, maybe it's a grade. So the ideas have zero value. They have zero worth, or, I don't
It's
know.
weird though, because my wife is always very supportive of new projects and weird things I want to do. If I say I'm going to do this thing, and she says, yeah, okay, cool. She's not that sort of wife, so I think it's weird.
Yeah.
I think that's probably what that means, as you said, but it's strange that I would have the dream. I just imagine when I woke up, it just seemed like I had a very meaningful dream, and I just had this sort of impression that there was this sort of TV show writer who lives in my head, and when he saw this gift that my friend got me that says Luke's ideas on it, he was just rubbing his hands together like, I'm gonna do something with this. This is gold. That's a symbol, man. I'm gonna go crazy today because it's so clearly symbolic and has a name on it even.
Yeah.
Do you ever have dreams that you remember, or recurring dreams, things that come back all the time?
Yeah, I think when I'm less stressed out, I have dreams. Because for a while, when I was incredibly stressed, I didn't dream. I probably did but I didn't. I couldn't remember them because I would wake up and my mouth would hurt because I'd been grinding my teeth.
Oh yeah.
But then when things are kind of calm, dreams come back and they're pretty potent, and I think I can remember them and throw some meaning onto them. Yeah.
Do you have a recurring dream?
There's a haunted house. Haunted houses are pretty common, and there's always
really.
Sometimes they're really bright, and there's some type of ghost or just malevolent entity that lives in the attic, in the ceiling somewhere. And it's horrifying, and it's fantastic to experience. It's that the terror is heavy.
Oh, I know. Somehow dream terror is the worst terror.
Yeah.
When it's in a dream, there's nothing scarier.
I was thinking of this. So right now, my neighbors above me, they just all day long, just every day, it's just tap 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 tap
Stomp
tap
around.
tap 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 tap,
Wearing
and
their
then
high heels.
moving stuff. There's just never.
I'm sorry.
Never any silence, never any rest. It's like, what are you doing walking around constantly all day long? It seems manic and insane. And I'm thinking, okay, well, if it gets to the point, obviously, I'll go and say, hello, there's this thing I noticed, blah, blah, blah. I'd have to be able to express it in Spanish and not be a jerk, or either get over it or something. But I was thinking, okay, what if the ultimate passive aggressive way to get through or to change somebody's behavior would be the ability to give them nightmares until they figure out, oh, when I don't do this thing, I don't have nightmares.
That's very Inception, isn't it? Real life Inception.
Yeah, maybe.
So what would that be? Like, you could do, you know what you could do? You could do prime number taps with a broomstick at night. You could just tap out all the prime numbers. 1, 3, 5, 7, and you can just tap them all out,
Yeah.
Eventually, it's going to drive him nuts because they're going to eventually sit down and go, "Holy shit, there's a pattern here. What's going on?" They're going to come down and they're going to see you, and you say, "I don't even have a broomstick. What are you talking about? I'm not tapping. What?"
Pour dirt on the floor to prove I don't have a broom.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And then say, "But I have heard the same thing at night, and I noticed this pattern. It's prime numbers. I don't know what's going on anyway. My uncle tells me they're looking for prime numbers at SETI and some alien, observatory, but whatever. I'm not sure. I haven't figured it out. Then they're going to start having dreams about extraterrestrials, and then you can play with that some more. That's what I would do.
So what about True Detective?
There's one more thing I wanted to say.
Go for it.
I can't remember.
Just pinging.
Can't remember now. Dang it. I can't remember.
You're
forgot.
thinking about prime numbers, aren't you?
Yeah. I forgot. I forget what I was going to say. But oh well.
Well, we were talking about Jung and dreams, Luke's ideas.
That's true.
Yeah.
We were.
Well, just talking about, because it's interesting to keep plugging away at your dream. You said normally your wife is very supportive of zany ideas and wants you to, I guess, see you do and enjoy what you like to do. Mm-hmm. What if in the dream that was sort of the compensatory projection of like her attitude, or as you perceive her attitude, that, in real life, when I'm awake, it's always supportive and all this other stuff, but in the dream, you sort of get the opposite. It's sort of
so maybe like one side of the coin is missing from the equation, so I have to make it up somehow.
Yeah.
Which would be really a shitty thing to do to yourself.
It seems like in the methods that Jung and Freud, because those are the only guys that I've read, they seem to always think about the opposite. Okay, what do we perceive this thing to say? Now, what is the thing it's not saying? And let's think about that too. Mm-hmm. So, which is generally diving into the negative side of ourselves, our shadow, and trying to understand, okay, well, why is it that I love to do this one thing with my life all the time? Well, that's because when you were a kid, you weren't allowed to do these other things you like, so you compensated and put it all over here, which is an idea sort of from Civilization and its Discontents that Freud wrote. And Jung has similar ideas of how we compensate for unsatisfied desires and also satisfied desires.
How well do they overlap if you're going to plot them out on a Venn diagram?
Freud and Jung?
In terms of their dream analysis?
I haven't read I've only read 3 books by Freud. And I've read a lot more Jung, but from that small amount or small sampling of work of theirs, obviously they're both psychoanalysts, and Jung gives Freud a lot of credit for opening the door to psychoanalysis and that whole field, where they place importance upon a lot of the same things. Where they diverge is the importance of sex in the human psyche, and how much of a foundation or how much of a hinge that is for human beings. So Freud puts a ton of emphasis, a ton of weight on the sexual repression and sexual development of a human being. And Jung, it seems like his scope is more broad.
Yeah.
Of course he puts importance on that aspect of a human being because it's an aspect of being human. The difference is that he encompasses more. I feel pretty confident that would stand up to critical analysis if somebody ever did that to my words.
I'm sure eventually they will.
Yeah.
People
God help them.
Yeah. If anybody's made it this far, that's great, I think. Good job.
Yeah.
You did it. You made it. We finally arrived at the point where we start to discuss True Detective, unless we have any other paths to go down. Any other diversions we need to take? Okay, so we're going to be talking about, if you haven't seen episode 5 of True Detective, make sure to watch that. Season 1 of True Detective, not season 2 or season 3. Or if there is a season 4, not that one either.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And if you're watching this in the far-flung future, when you go into the virtual reality world of True Detective, be sure to watch the boring two-dimensional presentation of season 1.
Yeah, what is that going to be like? Where when you know, someone wants to watch this conversation in 2085, they're going to have to suffer through. They're going to be walking around in their brilliant, vibrating, three-dimensional hyperspace world, and then they're going to have to look at a flat plane in front of them. It's going to be awful. I'm sure they'll be able to render us in 3D. I'm sure. Just stick a body on. I'm filming it so that they'll be able to do that. I'm thinking about that. They're going to cut our heads out and they're going to put them on bodies. This is a teal fleece color reference. It's teal. It's not blue. It looks blue, but it's teal.
Yeah, and action.
Yeah, seriously, if this ever makes it into the future, we are prophetic. Who's the guy who predicted the internet? I always forget his name now.
Al Gore?
No, it's a science fiction. That's a good one. That's a good one. I said predicted the internet. Not signed his name on a piece of paper and said, yeah, okay.
Well, what if it's sort of like that bulldozer thing we were talking about, where somebody could visually see you and visually see me and so completely know all of the events that lead up to your position in space-time that they would also know the building you're in, where you are geographically, what your body would look like, the back of your head, who Mushroom is, what she's doing right now, and then be able to so completely build and run a three-dimensional model that essentially it'll be there. And so this 2D thing will actually be able to be interpreted and projected onto a complete 3D experience.
Yeah, that's I think that is entertainment of the future. That is, if that could be going on right now. We could be in 4D. Yeah. This could be 4D Truman Show. I mean, for each of us. And there are higher dimensional beings, maybe the DMT elves or whatever. This is all for their pleasure, and they just get to watch all of these little dramas unfold, and they can pop into apartment 502 and see what's going on, and they're able to sort of zoom out and see the whole context and look at the where the neurons are going. Oh, look at this behavior. That's very interesting, and pop around and do whatever they want.
Are you in a 502? Is that?
I'm in a 502, yeah.
Because I'm in a 5B.
Okay.
And
similar.
2 is the second letter. B is the second letter of the alphabet. 5B, 502.
When you think about it, when you get right down to it, you're right.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the same. That's interesting. So you're on the 5th floor?
And also 502, if you take, so you've got let's see, what would it be? The 5 and the 2 and then a 0. If you make that 0 a little 0 in Spain, that means the 5th. Mm-hmm. So 5th floor, apartment 2 is also 5th floor, apartment B, which is what I'm in. So
hot dang. That's something else.
Fun times.
Yeah. Here's a question. If you were to jump out of your 5th floor apartment, would you survive the fall? How high up are you?
No way.
Yeah. Okay.
No way.
So it's legitimately 5 floors.
And it's pretty high.
Yeah. Same here. I've tried. I didn't make it. Yeah.
Man.
You reminded me about something else I was just going to say, but I keep forgetting about what I'm going to say. It's not supposed to be like this. When you drink a lot of coffee, you're supposed to be sharper, but it's making me duller.
Maybe our True Detectives conversations are so dumb that we're just skipping past it and getting to the good stuff.
No, there's definitely stuff I want to cover for this episode. It's a really good good episode. No, I think I was going to talk about. It'll come back to me later. Oh,
okay.
I remember what it is. You were talking about the lady upstairs, walking around.
Could be
clomping around. Maybe she probably even has special hooves she wears just to piss you off, to resents Americans or something.
Yeah.
Anyway, You ever think? Do you ever think that just for a split second, do you ever think that you are in the Truman Show, and that the people are doing things around you just because it's more entertaining for the audience who's watching? And if there's a lady, she's just on a loop upstairs because that's her job and she's being paid,
Yeah.
and she's in some sort of actors union. Because when I try to record things, when I'm recording things, I sometimes have this very distinct feeling that the ambulances, because you can't record when there's an ambulance, so you have to stop and wait for it to go away. I just picture this ambulance on a treadmill. Because it doesn't move and it stays in the same place, and it's just spinning and going wee wee, and I can't record for 45 minutes. Like, the audience is just loving these small moments of frustration. Oh, see, they prodded him, and now episode 2,974. This is my favorite one. This is where Luke goes crazy and throws a plate at the wall because of the treadmill ambulance
and jumps out the 5th floor window.
Yeah, exactly. Again.
Yeah.
Do you ever have those, just for a moment, those suspicions, and then you let it go? I do once in a while when things irritate me more than they should.
Yeah, and then maybe, when it reaches a boiling point and you realize how absurdly, desperately you're holding on to your need for things to go exactly how you want them to go.
Right, exactly. Why should New York obey my recording needs? Nobody needs to care about me, right? The person who's dying that the ambulance is trying to reach is more important than my need to record.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. But the second ambulance, I mean, come on.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, There one time it was really bad because it was this kid with a ram's horn. And he was blowing the ram's horn for 45 minutes. He went out of the apartment. This is ridiculous. This little kid with this little yarmulke went outside. I think it was part of his maybe coming of age thing. I don't know. What I'm not sure. I try to mock any traditions. It's fine. But he went outside with the ram's horn and he was blowing it for 45 minutes. And I couldn't believe that it was real. I couldn't believe that this kid was doing this, and I thought this must be just some sort of, I don't know, maybe there's some construction going on. How can this be? So I actually went out of my apartment and walked by this kid and looked at him and stopped for a second as he was just standing there blowing this ram's horn, and it went on for another 15 minutes after that.
You were in a Seinfeld episode.
Yeah. I'm the George Costanza of my universe.
Yeah.
Yeah. Who is the Larry David of the real universe?
That's great that you were being perturbed by a kid blowing a ram's horn in New York City. That's great. That's fantastic.
It is like a Seinfeld episode. It really is. That's the kind of thing that would infuriate George Costanza.
Yeah.
And why do so few people really appreciate Seinfeld? That's always bothered me. Why is Friends more popular than Seinfeld? That irritates me.
Yeah, different strokes.
Indeed. So let's get into True Detective. Yeah.
What'd you think?
Yeah. So I watched it twice actually. This is the only one I watched twice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm just making sure that doesn't mess with us again.
Yeah, man.
So this is the only episode you watched twice?
I think so. Yeah, I think it's the only one I watched twice. As I watched it after I watched episode 4 last time, accidentally, and then I watched it again just to make sure I was fresh. And I came away with a distinct impression of an anticlimax, but that has to be intentional because you have this build-up to this bad dude who did this thing, and there seems to be some importance to it because you have his henchman saying in the cafe at the beginning, you have a doesn't he say you have a shadow in you, something like that?
Yeah,
you have a devil.
I can see it around the edge of your eyes.
That seems to be important, and then later on, he's talking about black stars before they execute him, and then it's just over, and that's kind of it. And I'm assuming that then builds to something else later on in the season. Otherwise, it wouldn't be the 5th episode.
Mm-hmm.
But it still was kind of disappointing, or maybe I missed something. But the second time I watched it was the same as the first. I don't know what Black Stars is in a reference to. I don't know why it was necessary for the. I don't know if that was a plot point. Why the henchman had to say that to him? Why he said it?
Mm-hmm.
And then he just got shot and blew up. So I don't know. I feel kind of left wanting. Maybe that's intentional.
Yeah. So the Black Stars is a term taken directly from Robert W. Chambers' book, The King in Yellow, and that's the blacks. He mentions the Black Stars are mentioned several times there, and the only thing I could ever maybe pull out of the Black Star references is an inverted star. I mean, stars are bright, but then when you call it a black star, it makes you think, that's a paradox, or
Black star could be a black hole.
Right. Did they know about black holes in the early 1900s?
No, I don't think so.
Okay. Therefore, in the show, it could be a reference to a black hole. In the book that the Black Stars come from, they wouldn't have known about black holes. So the Black Star, it seems like I don't know. That's just that's where it comes from. And then I think he says also, you're in Carcosa now.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
That's also Carcosa is a place in that same book, The King in Yellow.
What is Carcosa?
I haven't read all of The King in Yellow. I think I've read maybe half of it, but at least the first 2 or 3 stories. So I don't, maybe Carcosa is revealed later. But so in The King in Yellow, there's this, it's sort of an anthology. It's all these loosely connected stories. And this will help with understanding the TV show. In the book, there's all these different characters in these different stories. Sometimes some of them end up finding this play, a play that they read, and they go crazy from reading it because it's so strange. And there's stuff about masks and taking off your mask and that making you go crazy. And there's the King in Yellow character, which, like I said, I haven't finished it, so I think there's more that'll be revealed about that stuff. But when you hear Carcosa and Black Stars in the series, it's a reference to that book.
So maybe Ledoux has just read that book and he's making reference to that.
I don't think in the show they really they don't look at Carcosa and Black Stars as, we got this from the King in Yellow. I think it sort of exists in the show apart from Robert W. Chambers' work.
So there's more on that then later.
Definitely, yeah. Carcosa seems to be a fictional place of, it's like a fictional kingdom of maybe madness and insanity, or just a dark nether place. So, so he says that to him, and then what? You said something.
The shadow part at the very beginning of the episode, I can't remember the guy's name. He's basically his helper, his sidekick, who leads them to the
DeWalt.
Sure.
I think it's DeWalt.
Who cares? R2-D2.
Right.
Yeah. But then he just gets blown up. Why does he need to say that? I mean, other than it being something that is supposed to make us maybe suspicious or cautious of Rust about, what's the point of that? And if that's the reason that they did it, it's kind of, this feels a little lazy to use him as that particular vehicle, as the character who's supposed to tease out some suspicion that we're supposed to have of Rust, or some foreshadowing to something that he does later, maybe. That's going to be his shadow, but it just didn't seem like there was any loop there. He said it, then they followed him, then he just blew up.
Well, he did say also, right at the beginning of their conversation, "You again," and I think he was the big guy that they were meeting. I think he looks at Rust and says, "You again." And so he could have been saying it to the other dude, Ginger, but
Mm.
which means I can't remember any other time in the show when Rust and the big guy would have had any contact unless there was something they cut out of the original cut,
Mm-hmm.
for the airing.
But it seems like
Yeah.
that would be a significant line. You would
Yeah.
want to cut that out completely. That would be weird.
Yeah, unless they're trying to imply that these guys know each other or have some connection previously. So I don't know. Maybe
or he's making a reference to the flat circle, that he's met other guys doing the same thing,
Yeah,
Yeah.
that would be cool.
But I doubt it.
Yeah.
Well, let's talk about the flat circle a little bit.
Yeah.
Because my take on it is Rust brought up later. He said, a man once told me that
Time is a flat circle.
Time is a flat circle, which is kind of strange because he's saying a man once told me. It's the man he's talking about, that he's in the hearing explaining how they killed him, and he's sharing a quote from him as though it's a piece of wisdom, right? And he really seems to latch onto that. Then he hadn't really mentioned it up to that point, right? But then once Ledoux says that, he seems to sort of latch onto it, and then later in the interview room, in the room with the other two detectives, he really latches onto that, and he smashes the beer can and talks about a conversation that we've already had in episode 3, which is kind of weird, about the fourth dimensional sort of hyper universe. It's weird that there's that overlap there, because we already talked about that.
Yeah.
That was kind of strange. But he seems to then have that as a kind of, I don't know, it seems to be a kind of driving force for him, not to do something, but to maybe not do something. And it feels to me like it made him less, how we've talked about how he's sort of this character who floats above the world in a zeppelin and has one tether to the earth, which is his job as a detective. And it seems to me that might be a trigger for him to then begin to transition to the person he later becomes, who's this person who's seems almost completely detached. And it's almost like that realization that even though he saved these two kids, or actually one of the kids, the realization that doesn't matter because there are going to be others doing the same thing, and it doesn't matter how hard you try to stop it, it's always going to be happening. Those kids will be in there again. It's almost like that either phrase or snips the line, and at that point then he gets into a relationship and almost pretends, almost begins to incubate the person he's going to become later, and in his incubation stage allows himself to be a guy who watches TV and has a girlfriend, but he's sort of incubating this new person. That's my feeling on that interaction, that encounter, and what came out of it.
That's cool. I haven't thought about that. Didn't strike me, the significance that the first time he heard that sentence, which was so important to him, was from Reggie Ledoux.
He didn't say it before, did he? He never said it before, did he?
I don't think so. Not when he was, not in his first conversations with Marty or anything like that. I don't think so.
Yeah. So Ledoux sort of maybe vocalized something that he already knew, but
yeah. And that concept is, like we talked about before, that's the phrase I was one of the phrases I was saying was really important, that time is a flat circle. Those kids are going to be in that shed again. It's all going to happen again. And then, our discussion via text about the Kali Yuga, the great year, and all that kind of stuff. And then with Mircea Eliades.
That was the chat bot I used to reply to people. That wasn't me.
That's fantastic. That Mircea Eliade talks about the same thing, about this sort of fractal of time. It spirals out, spirals back, spirals out, spirals back. So it's all going to happen again, maybe in that everything we do is going to repeat exactly as it's happening, but maybe at such an interval from now that it's incomprehensible for us to even imagine when it would happen again, but it will. But in the context of time, it doesn't sort of the length of time doesn't matter because it's, for us to try to imagine, okay, well, when are Luke and Matt going to be having the same conversation again? How many bazillion years, what we would call years from now, is that going to be? But it doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter because it's already there in this big piece, this big chunk of existence.
Yeah, and there was nothing else that could happen. This was always going to happen. Like Russ says, they were always going to be in that shed. I was always going to find a girl in a catatonic state. The dinosaurs were always going to get wiped out by a comet. AI was always going to become Skynet and obliterate humanity, right? So, and that's where he gets his fatalism from.
Well, does his fatalism intensify once he sort of has a sentence to tie it neatly in a little package and wrap it up? Does that cause a shift, as I sort of sense, do you think, or is there something else going on all along that I don't know about yet?
So what do you think about, that's a good question. I like that question too. What do you think about how that lines up with, okay, he sort of becomes normal, gets a girlfriend, has relationships, sits on the couch and watches TV with her, and looks at the remote like,
which is weird.
Why the hell am I doing this?
Yeah, it's weird to see him doing that. That was the most shocking part of the entire show so far, is seeing him having dinner with a woman. It's just bizarre. Yeah.
Forget the brains.
It hurt me. It made me upset.
So we see him start to do that. And then I think in the scene after that, he's in that interrogation room with that dude who then says, I know who you are. I know who the Yellow King is. And he sort of snaps back into, wait, what's going on? And then he sort of has a reason to go back into hermit, drunken Buddha, or not, well, more like hermetic activity.
So you think he was looking for an excuse to get back into it? You think he was starting to drift into Marty mode, and then something snapped him back? He had to realize this can't go on. This is not me. I'm starting to lose myself.
Maybe do you think it could be that he thought it was a smokescreen? That the idea that, oh, this is done, everything is wrapped up and finished, we solved the case, and the big existential crisis is thwarted. It seems like he suspected, even after the rescue of the kids, that this isn't over. This isn't done.
He didn't want it to be over because maybe he realized that if it's over and everything makes sense, then all of the things that make him able to tether himself to the earth are gone, and he's going to just kind of disappear into the status quo, basically.
Yeah.
Or something else. I don't know. I can't tell if it's a smokescreen or if he's incubating the next iteration of himself, or he's doing that intentionally, or he was actually starting to lose who he formerly was and actually was changing and kind of snapped out of it. I'm not sure.
I like the idea that he sort of suspected that wasn't all, that finding Reggie and DeWalt, or the big guy, that wasn't the end of it. So
yeah, I mean, because it's hard to say, because you know things that I don't know, so it's...
Well, how did you interpret the end of the episode? Because he goes to the school and he goes into that room and he picks up, this is after the two detectives are saying, hey, this guy Rust disappears for 7 years and he shows back up right when the same murder happens. Isn't it kind of a coincidence that he shows up, this guy is murdered, that in the past he led you in the investigation where he wanted to take it. So, and then they say basically, well, we think that Rust is the murderer because he's back in town and these murders are happening again.
Yeah.
And then the end of the episode is Rust in 2002 or so?
Yeah, maybe.
Yeah, 2002, go into that school that it almost seems like is a sanctuary that he's created for himself. Like he's revisiting a crime scene to check out his little sanctuary, his shrine to his activities. What do you think about that?
Are you telling me the ending of the show, or?
Well, no, it was in the end of this episode.
I know that.
Yeah. So I mean,
but I don't know I don't know what it means.
And I was just trying to lay out that it's clear in the show that that they're setting up the narrative to make you wonder whether or not Rust is actually the perpetrator of all these murders, because there's the guy that he interviews in the interrogation room, and he says, "I know who you are," and then later that guy commits suicide. So
yeah. So,
how do you feel about that?
Okay, so on first watching, I thought obviously they're trying to make it look more like, or give the viewer some hesitation about his role in the previous crime and this new one, and sort of to shift the perspective of the audience. But then watching it the second time, they go to the phone booth, and he's the one who asks them to get prints. He's the one who takes them to the phone booth that they trace the call to from the lawyer who said whatever, or whoever it was that said the thing that made what's his name kill himself, right? So that wouldn't have. Why would he have done that unless he were actually trying to find something out? You know, why would he have prints run on a phone that might lead to him? Unless that's a game he enjoys playing, which I get maybe a game he enjoys playing. I suspect that the school thing at the end, where he's playing with the what are those things called?
Devil traps.
Devil traps. I think he's just developed a fascination for it. I think it would be a pretty long stretch to now say, oh well, he's been the murderer the whole time. To carry the audience to you can do it, to carry the audience to a place where they're able to go along for that ride and be with the character and stay with the show. You have to really develop that point by point. Yeah. And they haven't done that with him. They did it with Walter White pretty well, because you follow Walter White along through the entire series, and then when Walter White turns out to be a monster, you're cheering him on. Yeah, this is, of course. That's what you say to yourself. But for him, I think it would be strange that he would be. It just doesn't seem to fit anything previously. Yeah, he's detached, but he doesn't seem to be. There's nothing that suggests that he's a murderer. Yeah. Unless there's something that you can mention that might hint that I haven't picked out.
Not even you, but you mentioned that he's a smart enough guy to pull off. He's a smart enough guy to pull off.
I'm gonna increase the volume on that part. Even you. That hurt, man. That hurt.
That Russ is a smart enough guy to pull off a red herring, like the fingerprint.
Yeah, right.
Thing. So, like even you saw that. So,
all of our conversations are going to be different from now on.
I blew it.
Yeah, you were holding that card. You were holding that card pretty close to the chest for a long time. You let it slip.
After 8 years of knowing you, Luke, it's about time we had a talk. So there's some things that you do, but maybe it's just to set up. I think I feel like at the very least it sets up enough dissonance or ambivalence between what we know and what we want to believe, and between that and what is possible, what we think, oh, what could they do in this show? Yeah. Where could they take it? And so we want to see more. And there's more story to tell, because there is still some stuff that's unresolved.
So that's the red herring, though. The red herring is to creatively create mystery and create cliffhangeriness so that you want to watch the thing that happens next. I just don't see how they would turn him into the murderer without doing the work along the way to make the audience who's actually been paying attention buy into it and go, oh yeah, oh, all along, well, okay, good show. I just don't think that they've done the background work. So if it's just sort of a red herring to sort of pique interest and make people sort of wonder what's going to happen next and wonder why he's holding up those devil traps in the light, then yes, that's a successful. For a moment, you doubt it, but I would be shocked and probably disappointed if he ends up being the murderer. I would be, unless they have to cover a lot of ground in 3 episodes in order to make that happen, and I would be totally shocked by that. Even more shocked if they can do it and make it believable.
Yeah, that'd be incredibly impressive if they do that right.
Yeah, that'd be amazing. Back to the flat circle thing. I wanted to ask you actually. So, when I was on a trip and you mentioned you had just finished a book, and I wonder because we were talking about in episode 3 or after episode 3, we talked a little bit about fractals, and we talked a little bit about the sort of braid universe, this sort of four-dimensional object, which was an interesting conversation. I re-listened to it. It's also interesting to listen to again. And then you read a book on the topic. I wonder if you can. Was it that one or is it that one? Can that tie in any way to this conversation, or does that take us in a very different direction?
Yeah, so it's Mircea Eliade. The myth of the eternal return. Mm-hmm. It's fantastic, and he even writes in that book, if anybody's interested in reading it, it's not that long. I think it's maybe 200 pages, and it's about, or he said of that book that if anybody's going to read one book of mine, read that one. That is basically the culmination of the thrust of his ideas in career in general. And so we talked before about, at the brainstem level, there's these things going on, but then, and that's sort of localized to our, this little part of a human body, right? It's right there, and all that stuff is going on right there. But then when it finds expression in a human body, when all of those drives and impulses are made manifest, when they find expression coming out of our limbs and our speech and all these different things, then the area of effect isn't just the brainstem, it's a bigger area of effect, right? But essentially, maybe we're mirroring in our body the same thing that's going on at a much smaller scale in our brainstem. Mm-hmm. Much like, so the same pattern that's going on in here is actually happening here in our bodies. Does that make sense?
Sort of like that's sort of the idea of a fractal pattern. You have a main tree stem and then a branch that is the same ratio in dimension and to its branch. Yeah. Exactly.
And so basically you can overlay that activity onto everything at varying degrees and very varying levels. This fractal of just repeated pattern, repeated activity. And what Eliade talks about is that you and I and everyone we know we're basically doing the same thing, the same patterns that all of our ancestors were doing, even though the ancestors maybe did it at a simpler level, in the sense that they didn't have the internet, they didn't have telephones, they didn't have these things, but they communicated. Internet, telephone, all that is just a more complex and broad way
sort of a phenotype doing for us. Yeah.
Maybe. Yeah. It's so internet is, you've got people across the planet talking, but really it's just the exact same thing as if they were standing right next to each other doing the same thing. They're just talking, they're just communicating and relaying ideas. And then you can think, well, in the brain, you've got neurons, which are just these two little things like talking to, relaying signals to each other. Right. And then you can find the sort of same activity at a, large scale, small scale, smaller, all the way down. And much like a fractal pattern. Right. Mm-hmm. And so that's, in that example, we can think of all those things happening right here and right now. You and me talking to each other, which is really the same as two people in the same room talking to each other, which is the same thing as the neurons firing and talking to each other inside the brain. But that's all in this instant right now. Monday, November 19th, 2018 at 8:25. Okay, so what if we stretch that example across time? So instead of that one localized example of that communication in that sort of fractal, right, that we just illustrated, what if we stretch it across time to say that essentially we're repeating the same things. We're just communicating, but as time, as we think about it, moves this way, we used to only be able to communicate if we were in the same room, if we were in the same space, right? But then as time goes on, that the distance sort of spirals out, right? Mm-hmm. And now we can communicate across the world instantaneously, much like in the past we were able to communicate only next to each other. But essentially, we're still just communicating, no matter at what point in time we're at. And the reason we do that, the reason we communicate and we keep repeating that pattern is because we find it powerful, we find it effective. It rewards us. It reminds us that I want to keep communicating because, or even the reason we have the drive to do it is because that's what Eliade would say is powerful. And he says that those types of activities that we repeat over and over again, because they're powerful, that's where we get our sense of the religious from and the sacred from. So when he says sacred, he's talking about that. But is any of that clear?
Is he kind of also sort of saying that the underlying thrust of what's powerful in the human sphere of activities can take on forms, and the forms are more or less irrelevant. Not irrelevant, but change them, make them bigger, smaller, do whatever you want, as long as the core underlying thing that's happening is there. It can sort of expand and contract to fit, basically. So we're engaging in the same way, and there might be nuances to online communication. There might be nuances to face-to-face communication. I mean, who knows how much your pheromones would be affecting me right now if we were face-to-face? Who knows?
I'll drink to that.
I'll shake to that. But basically, there's sort of this. There's a theme underlying this entire conversation. I'm telling you, it's the same thing. There's this core underneath everything, and it's unchanging, and it's at every level happening. But then on top of that, the things that are going on here on the surface, which are very much affected by the core and are maybe analogous to it in some way, they can be swapped out and changed and moved and expanded and contracted in a lot of different ways. And it doesn't matter because it's fundamentally the same. It's the idea, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
But the time point, I don't understand the relevance of the time point. Why does that matter?
So one of the thing that Eliade talks about time a lot. It's fascinating to hear his historian of religions talk about time, because you got to touch a little bit of scientific reasoning with it, and you can't just let it exist in maybe sort of a literary logic sphere. And so he places importance upon time because in these tribes and groups, all these people groups in the past, they spoke about mythic time in the sense, well, there's two levels of time. There's a time that we experience, which is profane time or historical time, like Monday, November 19th, 2018. And they would experience that too, sort of their spot in history, right? But then they would also talk about the in illo tempore, which means this mythic time. And when they talk about, here's our profane time and here's sacred time in illo tempore, and in illo tempore is when the gods or the first creators, the first movers maybe, instigated the actions that we do today. They are the ones that dictated how we should hunt, how we should marry, how we should wage war, how we should cook fish, how we should dance, how we should do every single thing. And it was in that mythic time that they did these things, and we've been repeating them ever since. Mm-hmm. Okay? And we repeat them because we know if we repeat what they showed us, then we will live another day, that the desires we have will be satisfied. We will do the right thing. Whereas if we do, and in that sense, even what we do in that profane historic time is a reenactment of the first time that thing was done. And in some sense, we're actually reenacting eternity, because this was in that sacred time, there was no time. But now that there's sort of this linear movement of time, and it's very important that, and Eliade expressed this, it seems like he's trying to get across the idea that when we do those things, in some sense, we're existing in eternity.
Right.
We're not existing in this profane, meaningless existence, because when we repeat the things that are meaningful, we're living in eternity, in a sense. And so, I think
it's an argument for tradition. It really is. It's sort of like having a master plate for a newspaper or something, and each copy that's printed is carrying out the information processed on the master plate. There's a master plate. That's the one that's important. But you don't spread it around. The master plate, everybody can't look at the giant piece of metal. They get a copy of it, and by reading it, you're tapping into the information that everybody else has, and you're able to engage with everybody else. Not that that's a great analogy, but that's sort of kind of how it feels. I mean, I get the idea. There's sort of this baseline primordial origin, and then a way to peek your head above your basic animal self and get into sort of what you see as divine, what you feel as divine, by engaging in these socially reinforced rituals, whatever they may be, whether it's communication or religious practice or sacrifice or cooking or whatever. And that's a really powerful way to reinforce those things, and it makes a good case for them. And that makes me want to read that book. Actually, that's pretty cool.
That's good.
Is that my understanding? Is that about right?
Yeah, it's really close. I think. I mean, who knows if I'm expressing it correctly? Mm-hmm. I mean, even me.
The word.
So.
Cheers to you, sir. I'm not worthy.
Yeah. It's so cool. It's such a cool idea, because it seems to lay onto a lot of the things that Carl Sagan says, a lot of things that Neil deGrasse Tyson says, a lot of things that probably Richard Feynman, the physicist.
Yeah.
Because you see that pattern, that what if the activity that the mitochondrial DNA or whatever, when we were a much simpler organism with fewer moving parts, what if they're doing the same thing? I mean, mitochondria takes in energy, puts out waste, right? I mean, that's what humans do. And right?
Then you start talking about things on different levels. There are things by analogy that are true by analogy, and things that are true by analogy are interesting to talk about, but don't have any relevance to the way that you live. Knowing that a mitochondria inside of a cell has a certain function that maybe by analogy is similar to how a factory operates is interesting to know, but useless in practice. Whereas maybe when you're talking about neurons interacting and how we communicate, that analogy has real relevance, because when you're communicating, when you're speaking, you actually have neurons talking to each other at certain distances, which then pop to the higher level of you speaking to another person at relative distances. So that actually has significance. So I would want to sort of tease apart some of these analogies and talk about which ones are there because they're sort of interesting analogies to play with, which ones are real and meaningful, and which ones are maybe just totally hypothetical but cool to talk about. Well, for example, if we're talking about the analogy of, okay, so let's say our interaction, for example, has some, I think we were messaging about this before, or my assistant and you were messaging about this before.
Kathy?
Yes. No, not Kathy. I fired Kathy. Got rid of her. She's too old.
She's gonna
she turned
capture
20,
you, break your legs.
She turned 26. I kicked her out the door. I
Yeah,
said, Kathy, you're getting old. Do something else. Can't look at you anymore. You're gross.
Yeah, she's gonna pull a misery on you.
I hope so. That's why I did it. All part of the plan. Put it in my book of ideas.
0.
Kathy's back.
I'm gonna pull off my mushroom mask. So I've been writing 0 the whole time.
This episode's really exposing me. Yeah, so no, I was gonna say is our interactions maybe are part of some sort of larger mechanism on a society level, on an internet level, right? If our words somehow are part of the lexicon that's changing, if our interactions online are somehow just a tiny little piece of the way that the fabric of society or the internet is becoming more aware of itself, or at least part of the data center that will become a node as sort of analogized by a single neuron in this sort of large internet infrastructure. That kind of thing, which we don't even know will come to pass, is still an interesting analogy to talk about. So that's, I think, a different type. Anyway, yeah. I think... Go ahead.
Sure, that mitochondrial thing has varying levels of usefulness when it comes to being an analogy, right?
What do you mean?
I think I kind of figured that's what you were just saying, is that perhaps when I used the mitochondria analogy or started to, you were saying, oh, maybe there's a more useful, a more transparent overlay, or the sign. You know, if I used a different analogy that the
I wasn't saying that's a bad analogy. I think it's a good analogy. Okay. I just don't think it's an analogy that is real on any level, or not an analogy that's not real on any level. It's true, and the way that a factory operates is true. Those are both two real things. They're analogous. Yeah. They have a nerve center, and they have operations, and they have waste, and they have input. Materials come in, things are built, things are manufactured, waste. But I was saying it would be interesting to separate them out, to talk about things that are analogous and things that are actually real. The neuron one is real. Mm-hmm. Neurons interact and make you say things to other people. And when you say things to other people, you're kind of acting as potentially a piece of a neuron for something larger than yourself. That's actually possibly a real thing. Whereas the mitochondrial thing is, I don't know how real that is. That's just a thing to talk about. You know what I mean?
Sure. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. It'd be helpful if I read that book as well, maybe. Because all I'm saying is based on what you're saying, what you're telling me. So it's really
that would be cool if you read that book.
I don't know how to read. It's hard, man. Life is hard. I don't even know I can't even look at a bus schedule. I don't even know what's going on because I don't even know numbers.
Yeah.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
know
That's good.
the colon in the middle I get, the two dots. I know what that is. But then the left and the right side, it just blows my mind. I have no idea.
Yeah. Perfect.
This, this is just a chicken wrote this with its little hands. I just said, make it look like Chinese.
It goes
But
done.
I suspect Chinese is just chickens walking around on a page. It's possible.
And that was the end of his English teaching career in China. Uh,
uh,
yeah,
yeah, where were we
good
going?
stuff. Well, we were talking about the time is a flat circle, the
Mm.
repetition of time. Time is a sacred thing. Those kids are going to be in that trailer again. Uh,
I wanted to mention something about that. I wonder
mhm,
if he's talking about it as a sort of ontologically true point
mhm,
uh, on a small scale or a large scale. On a large scale, you have maybe a parallel universe where that exact same thing is happening, or maybe a slightly different universe where that exact same thing is happening, or an infinite number of universes where that's happening, or that it's happening to people like that, and that no matter what you do, you're never going to completely remove the crazies from the equation and stop
yeah,
all the Ledus, because there will always be someone who will have the opportunity to do something horrific to somebody else, and it doesn't matter if you save one, you're not going to wipe that reality from the universe. It's sort of like, um, have you ever thought about someone close to you and then imagined something horrible happening to them? Just thinking about it is really painful, and thinking about it in a sense makes it real. And then you realize that that sort of thing actually happens to people. One
mhm,
time, Mushroom almost got kidnapped. She was very close, and sort of that not happening is has been a really terrible experience for me.
yeah,
Not as terrible as if as though if it were to happen, that would be obviously more terrible, but still terrible
right,
that it almost happened, because then
yeah,
now this sort of possibility of that thing happening lives in my head, and then it sort of made it real to me that that happens to other people. And
yeah,
so now maybe on one hand it's good because I can really empathize with people
mhm,
who are sex trafficked, for example, on a deeper level than I might have before. Because before you would acknowledge it, you see it happen, you know you hear about fires and horrible things, but when it happens to you or almost happens to you, it sinks in on a deeper level. So
yeah,
my sort of sense with I feel like Rust's anxiety there, part of it is now I've seen these two kids in the back of this old dump truck or whatever they're sitting in, and I know what that looks like, and I know that even though I saved one of them, doesn't matter, there are plenty more right now sitting in the back of similar trucks or in some small room, and there's nothing I
yeah,
can do, and it's worse that I've seen it, and even worse that I've helped these two kids in some sort of weird way.
mm,
For me, I mean, it's obviously better for that little girl. That's right. You want to save as many people as
yeah,
possible, but now it's sort of sunk in on a deeper level how evil the world is and how much evil
mhm,
exists, and how disturbing it is to actually accept that someone who walks around and buys coffee at Starbucks and has a pair of blue jeans, how evil some of those people actually are, and what they're willing to do for money, maybe,
yeah, yeah,
or their basic biological urges that have gone sort of haywire.
yeah.
Have you had that sort of experience where something sunk in for you that's maybe that you realized before intellectually, but you didn't really get it until
Yeah,
it happened or almost happened?
sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
A few different times, a few different ways. Yeah. Um, I don't know if it's anything I'd want to talk about, but yeah,
Okay.
for sure.
Okay.
And yeah,
So
it causes, yeah, it definitely instills a bit of empathy
Yeah.
because it opens you up to a different level of consciousness, and that, oh, that's how that feels. Or kind of like Mushroom didn't get kidnapped, but she almost did. So man, imagine how much worse it would be if she had been kidnapped. And now you can relate to that emotion in a way that you couldn't before.
But then you live out that alternate reality as well, mentally. And just
Yeah,
living out the alternate reality, knowing how close that hair was split, living
yeah,
out that alternate reality is not as bad, but not good, not fun.
yeah,
And so
sure.
that sort of makes me think about what is real and what's not real, because things that are not real are also real in a sense, because now they exist in my sort of my mental model of the world.
Yeah,
Yeah.
sure. Yeah.
So which
And
way do you think it was meant in the show? Do you think it was meant as other universes, or do you think it was it meant as just what I was talking about, the fact that there will always be evil?
I think it's more in a more in a concrete way that this exact same thing is going to happen again. And we were always, because I think he says some words like that when he's explaining to the detectives his interpretation of that,
Mm-hmm.
of what happened. And it's that we're essentially, he said destined. Maybe I wrote it down. Let me see if I wrote it down.
Oh, you have notes.
Yeah.
What else you got?
Waiting for the good years till you get ass cancer. That's one of them I've got written down.
Good one.
That's Marty talking
Mm-hmm.
about. But as far as Russ talking about that, it seems like I took from that little monologue, soliloquy, that he means that we're all automatons, we're all robots playing out a part that we were always destined to play. Because if this is going to happen again, that means there's nothing we can do to avoid it, and we're actually just playing out a script, which could go to that fractal illustration again. Yeah. So also that seems to line up with the other stuff he says in the show, and maybe the point of the show. So
What's the point of the show?
One of the points of the show.
Which is what?
Well, that looking at the myth of the eternal return, and also the dynamic between men and women. So,
Well, didn't that part wasn't that part lined up with the part where Marty was roller skating with his daughters?
mm,
Wasn't
yeah,
that at the same time? So isn't
close. Yeah,
that the same thing? So there's this other thing this pattern that repeats itself. The behavior of men, how men interact in relationships, they maybe engage in infidelity, then they beg to return because they start to see maybe the value of having a family or whatever it is, and then almost, inevitably, they know that they're going to be forgiven. There's a road that they have to climb, a
the
particular
myth
road.
of the eternal return.
Right. They have to climb that road, but it's
Yeah,
almost ceremonious. It's almost like, I know how this ends, you know how this ends, but that doesn't mean you can't
yeah,
do it still. That's
yeah,
what I thought was an interesting line. Marty's wife said, "You have a long road to climb." It's almost like, well, then if he has, why don't you just call it a day now, and just, you know, she knows how it's going to end. He knows how it's going to end.
yeah,
That means they've already made it there. They've already arrived, but they have to go through the charade of him saying how sorry he is and doing
yeah,
putting in all the work. But they've
yeah,
already said what the conclusion is,
yeah.
which is, I think, weird.
Well, didn't Rust and Maggie already had the conversation in the diner, right? I think
Mm-hmm.
we talked about that. So
We did
he
briefly,
talks
yeah.
about, yeah. So he mentioned there, the only reason for this whole man and woman charade is because of the kids. It's always, just about the kids. And then, this is what, other than that, this is what men and women do to each other. They grow apart, they change, and all that stuff.
Yeah.
So it's a known narrative. And to like what you're saying, maybe to expect anything different, it's so known that we're only being ceremonious when we think that anything could change.
Right, but if we all know the narrative, then why do we have to play it out? If we all know where it goes and how it ends, then why does it still need to take place? Why do we still have to have the ritual? Can we not just jump to the conclusion? Can we not just say, well, you're going to forgive me. I mean, just do it now. Why not? And
Yeah,
I'll be nice.
maybe an apt response would be Rust's earlier statement about the only reason, because then if people realized what they were, they would walk hand in hand into oblivion rather than reproduce. And then Marty asks him, well, why do you persist in existence? And he says, obviously, because I lack the constitution for suicide. And what else did he say? Why did he stay?
I can't remember. First
But
episode, right?
I think so. Yeah. It's essentially, we know how this goes.
Yeah.
We know the pattern. We know what men and women do. So why don't we just change it? And it's like, well, we lack the constitution to do what we project we would actually do, knowing what the chain of events is always going to be. Yet we still choose to participate.
Right, but our operating systems don't run fast enough to be able to just get to the end quickly. We have to actually run the whole code day by day. Yeah.
We have to put that, because our body is a part of it. We have to put that. The only way to bring our bodies online, maybe with our mind, is for our body to have that experience.
Right, exactly.
To know it.
I think that's the key to it. So you know how it ends, but if you don't go through it, even though you know how it ends, then emotionally you're not going to your body's going to reject it, and it's not going to be real, even though you already know the end.
Yeah.
So it's sort of like if you could fast forward a pregnancy and make it a day long, you probably have parents just throwing their kids into dumpsters. You know what I mean? Because there wasn't that, right? You wouldn't have, maybe the mother instinct wouldn't be as strong because of there's a reason that the gestation period is as long as it is. Obviously, growth has to take place, but there are things that happen to the mother's brain, and obviously the expectation and the thought that goes into planning and all of that. You're sort of, what you're doing is you're tying yourself into, even let's say if you're the father, you're tying your life into what you expect things to be in the future. Mm-hmm. And you're integrating your plans into this new person which is going to come out. And when you do that, you wrap your emotions into those plans, you wrap your self-worth into those plans, you wrap your identity into those future plans. If pregnancy were a one-day affair, then that's a ridiculous example, but it's the time that passes and the rituals that you go through, Lamaze and all of that, which makes the child able to grab onto its parents, because the kids are just parasites, right? I mean, if you think about it, until the age of 16, you're just a parasite. You are. If you think of a kid as a parasite, you can make a good case for it. This little monster is growing inside of another person and stealing their nutrients. Not only are they stealing the nutrients of that person, they're also controlling those two people's minds.
Yeah.
They're forcing them to go to IKEA and buy cribs and take money out of their pockets that they worked for and get into debt and, buy like mobiles and things like that. And it's like this little being that knows absolutely nothing, which is a fetus, is extremely powerful, sucking nutrients and controlling the brains of entire collectives of people in the real physical world. Then when they come out, they're totally helpless. So if they haven't enlisted some sort of mechanism to make these people say God and just throw it in the dumpster, then it's not gonna work, right? So I better stay in here for 9 months so that they kind of have a plan around me, and they're waiting for me, and there's expectation, and I'm causing them pain, which is going to make them feel like they've invested something in me. So they're not going to throw me in the dumpster. They're going to keep me.
Or like if Mary and Joseph in the manger, when the baby came out, they said, "God, do it."
Let's not laugh at that. Let's not laugh. Let's not make light of it. That's not funny. Donkey, are you hungry? Have any more myrrh? I'll trade you 2 bottles of myrrh for this baby. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. Man, I'm gonna edit this part out because this is blasphemous. Yeah. So, but if you look at it from that point of view, a baby is a parasite, and there's a. Are you familiar with the concept of phenotypes?
Yeah.
Okay, good. So you know
familiar. I couldn't repeat it, but familiar. Yeah.
Yeah, it's you're familiar with the cuckoo.
Mm.
What the cuckoo does?
Tell me.
Man, the cuckoo is a really cool bird. It's evil, but it's cool. So there's this the phenotype is the genetic characteristics that we have that extend beyond our bodies, basically. And especially those which manifest in the physical world or in the behavior of things outside of ourselves. So a bird's nest is a simple example of a phenotype. In other words, it's the bird knows how to build a nest. The bird knows how to build a nest. And the nest is, in a way, part of the bird's evolution.
Mm-hmm.
It's not like it's a thing separate from the bird, but without the bird's evolution in the way that it's gone, it wouldn't know how to make the nest.
Yeah.
Okay.
And the nest wouldn't exist.
Right. Language is a phenotype. We shape society. Society is a phenotype. The way that we structure society and families is an extended phenotype. An extended phenotype goes farther beyond. So, go ahead.
When I heard phenotype, it was more connected to that, like skin color is a phenotype, or hair is a phenotype.
There's a line between phenotype and extended phenotype. So let's say extended phenotype is, I think, beyond the physical appearance. The expressions of genes may be phenotypes, then maybe it's the extended phenotype that's beyond. So there's a line between direct genetic expression in things like skin color, eye color, and behavior, and the things that those cause outside of the individual. And now
like
maybe
pyramids.
Yeah, kind of. Yeah, sure. Yeah. So when the little parasite in the ant makes the ant climb up on a blade of grass and get itself eaten by a sheep or a cow, that is the phenotype, the extent. Let's say the extent. I can't remember now, so I'm sorry. It might be the extended phenotype. An expression of the parasite to control the ant's behavior. So similarly, there's this bird that lays eggs, and its eggs are specifically similar to a particular other species of birds. So they don't take care of their own young. They lay eggs in the nests of other birds. Yeah. And the parents can't tell that they're not their own eggs. So they're basically hijacking the parental instincts of the other birds to take care of it.
Yeah.
So these cuckoos are born, and maybe they're huge, and they just throw out the other eggs. And these tiny little parents are feeding this gigantic bird, and they have no idea. They think it's their child. They don't understand that it is genetically hijacking their desire to feed their children, and they're suffering because of that, right?
Right.
So I think that's an example of the phenotype. Anyway, so I can't remember why we went down this path, but
me neither.
Yeah. We were talking about kids and why we have kids.
Right. Which related to not Marty, but Maggie and Rust's conversation.
Right. So that made me think about kids as
Parasites.
And the need, no, and oh, I remember what it was. The need for the ritual, to actually do the ritual, because
Oh yeah, yeah.
if it happened overnight, then it wouldn't have the emotional, it wouldn't trigger the things that it needs to trigger.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. It wouldn't evoke in the body, as the body has evolved to respond, what is needed to then carry forward that repeated pattern of having another baby, or people having babies. Because if you got pregnant overnight and just all of a sudden all that stuff happened in a day, be like, whoa, what is this? This is weird. Get rid of it.
Yeah.
Cut it out, or whatever.
Sell it for some myrrh.
Yeah. Uh, yeah. And how does that relate to the show? Because we're talking about Marty in the relationship with his wife, and then Rust and his.
She said you have a long road to go, or a long road to climb, and that could be interpreted as just nothing.
Which happens at the same time that Rust was talking about. He was uttering some lines about the myth of about the eternal return. Yeah, and repeated patterns.
Yeah.
Out and back, we made it.
Man, we made it back. I'm glad. It was quite a journey, and I apologize. I think it's better if I drink whiskey or wine instead of coffee, because I'm jumping all over the place, and I apologize. I drank all of it.
Well, him talking about those beings that are on the outside seeing time as a flat circle, because much like that, the braid that you told me about, moving us, all of our atoms and particles moving through that braid, and if we saw all of that happening at the same time, we wouldn't see it. Oh, this is Monday the 19th, and this was Sunday the 18th. It's all, when it's all sped up, it's all just happening at the same time, and therefore all matter that ever existed and will exist, existing all at once, just looks like it's a sphere, right?
Mm-hmm.
But then from this point of view, it just looks like a circle. That time, everything is just a flat circle.
Why do you think? Yeah. Why do you think it's Ledoux who needs to remind or flip that particular switch in Marty? Is there another link between them that's not seen yet, or does the fact that he is the most evil character represent some sort of pull for Marty in a switch in direction?
Maybe it's just another. He's just another Buddha or Bodhisattva, a very dark, evil Bodhisattva, along Rust's sort of progression towards nirvana, to get out of whatever cycle he's caught in himself. So,
is he? Do you think he's really caught in a cycle when he gets a girlfriend? Is that the beginning of a cycle? Why does he allow himself to go there? I still don't understand how he so easily just slips into that, because it's really quite surprising when you see him just having a normal dinner with a girlfriend.
Yeah.
It's kind of shocking. It seems so out of character.
Have you ever seen The Holy Mountain?
Mm-mm.
It's by Alejandro Jodorowsky. So it's sort of this cult classic. It came out in 1973. I just watched it. I think I finished it yesterday. And I'll just say up front, the images you see of it are only from maybe the first third of the movie. So all the stuff online, you see this guy with this white hat that goes out like this, and he's got these either two rams or two naked women beside him. And he's called the Alchemist. There's 2/3 more of a movie, and it's different than what I think people normally see or recognize as the Holy Mountain. And I bring it up because there's a point in that movie where there's a character, and he's on this sort of cosmic spiritual journey, right? He's trying to be self-actualized and get out of this cycle of fear and desire. And at one point, he comes to a point where he's very close to his goal. And at that point, that's the point where it's very easy to get sidetracked by these very rewarding rewards.
Sort of Green Knight sort of esque things.
Sure. Yeah. That's when temptation is at its strongest, when you're close to your goal. And so maybe that's what happens with, him getting the girlfriend, is maybe that this is sort of, it's sort of a little sidetrack, flirting with getting off the path and not persisting in.
I because yeah, because that facet of this show is so interesting to me. The most interesting part of the show, as I've kind of always said, I wish that were more deeply explored.
Mm.
The dynamic between ways of being, ways of living, between Rust and Marty has always been the thing that I want to see next, because I want to see how those two ways of being sort of intermingle, And so when I see Russ starting to do Marty things, then I think, why is he doing this? Is he playing around with it? Is he trying to experiment with it? Is he trying to go down a different road? Is he being sidetracked? What's going on? And it's not explored. It's not satisfying, even slightly satisfying. It just shows him at dinner once. It shows him watching TV once. It's about 25 seconds, and it's really
his expression
not enough.
When he's
he looks
watching TV though.
Well, if
it
you
says it all.
If you say it's Gawain style temptation, I would say probably not, because he does not look like he's enjoying that.
Yeah, well, and it seems like, but he knows it. He knows. Yeah.
So it's more like let's just do. I've wrapped up this package. It's like a method actor who finishes a role after 9 months. Daniel Day-Lewis, you just played Lincoln. Now who am I? My identity was wrapped up in Lincoln. I don't have my next character, so I was just some bitch over here. I'll just hang out with her for a while and see what happens.
Make shoes.
Yeah, or make shoes. It's maybe like that. Maybe he sort of. It suddenly ended. He was enjoying the mystery. He was enthralled. He was tied in, and then done. And deep down, he wished it weren't. He liked following the threads.
I don't get to be Crash anymore.
So I'm lost. I'm sort of in free float. And what do I grab onto? Oh, someone introduced me to this lady. Well, maybe it'll work as a sort of stopgap for now.
Yeah.
But then the danger is not that he would willingly go there, but that he would get lost there, and that he would put on a mask for an entire lifetime, for the rest of his life, and be there. Now it's starting to make sense. Yes, now if that's what it is, I'm just sort of realizing it's sort of like the guy who gets a part-time job in the summer to fund something, and then can't work up the gumption to quit, and works there for 40 years and wakes up at the age of 65 and realizes that his entire life has been a mask, and feels regret, extreme regret. That person who never grew up in that particular way. As though, and then but if you were offered something along the way that suddenly ripped the mask off your face, and you realized there was something real to pursue, then your eyes would go wide, and you would probably jump on it. So as you said, when he's talking to the guy in the cell, or he's in the interrogation room, is that why he gets so into it? Is that why he?
Yeah, makes sense to me. I like that. Sounds good.
Yeah. I mean, you already said that earlier. I just sort of wasn't listening, and then I realized it just now.
You hadn't had enough coffee.
Yeah. I'm trying to take credit for it.
Yeah.
People are going to remember more when I said it.
As usual. What did you think about? Well, there were three things I wanted to bring up.
And you haven't brought them up yet?
Haven't brought them up yet. So
Jesus. You just taking your time, or what? I mean,
watching you lose it on coffee. I don't know if this was intentional, but I think it was, just as an interesting note, is at the Oracle at Delphi. I think this is where it was. They used to keep the Greeks. I think this is in the Greeks, that they used to keep.
Yeah, Spartans, right?
I can't remember, but they had these oracles they would go visit, and what was it was this girl that they would keep drugged
Mm-hmm.
all the time. I think if you see it in 300, that's what it is too.
Mm-hmm.
When they go to visit the oracle, she's this girl that's drugged, and I wonder if that is if the girls kept drugged in this show is sort of a tip of the hat, a nod to, or an allusion to the oracle at Delphi, and that type of habit. Yeah, I just thought that was.
Who?
So remember the little girl that they rescue out of the shed?
Yes.
They found her in a catatonic state. I wonder if that's sort of supposed to embody that idea of the oracle at Delphi, but in a very even more perverse and twisted way.
That would be a pretty peripheral reference, though, because she has no interaction with anybody. She just sits up. She doesn't interact.
Right, we don't see her interact, but then also the other female victims were drugged, and they're all female, and they've all got this sort of symbolic decor and garb.
Yeah, more so for the first girl that they see at the tree. That would make sense.
Yeah. Well, and then also the new victim that Rust and Marty see a picture of. She's a crown of horns, and she's sort of bound up, sort of ceremoniously and in a symbolic way.
I don't need to be hit over the head with things too much, but if you were going to do that with the little girl in the truck, you'd have to have the spiral symbol. You'd have to see some sort of. It seems the way that they present it is that these are two separate things. The dude is he's maybe into this sort of ritual, and maybe there's an oracle of Delphi-ness with these women who he kills in this particular way with the spiral. B, he's a crazy pedophile. Separate.
Good point.
Otherwise, you'd want to. You got to show something. You have to have a clue. There has to be a
visual affirmation.
Just give me something. Yeah.
Sure.
But yeah, interesting. I think I approve of that reference.
And I thought Marty's lines, the wait, and when you wake up and you realize that, or when you think that you've been waiting for the good years all your life, and then you realize that the good years are in your past, or you wake up and you find out you got ass cancer, and then the idea of the future is behind you. Just sort of just powerful segment where you've got this guy who's sort of waking up in a sense, and he's coming out of a dream that he's been having, and a dream is how he woke up and he missed the reality of the simple thing of his wife and his kids being the solution, what he was seeking the entire time. So I don't know. And the way he phrased it is.
What do you think about that, though?
Wonderful vernacular.
What do you think about that?
I think it's questions like that, and you hear a lot of. It seems like I've listened to and heard a lot of successful people kind of, or what we would call successful, say similar things that. Or people that are pursuing something.
Was my family all along?
Sure, yeah, stuff like that, or it's just something else, something that was much that you didn't have to work as hard to pursue. I don't know.
Wish I'd beat my kids more.
yeah. One more lick and that would have done it. But yeah, I don't know. It's an interesting. It's a thing that shows up in a lot of art. In movies with characters and all that, to sort of take out, I wonder if there's that's an expression in art. I wonder if it's a useful thing to ask myself sometimes, just to kind of keep things in check and reevaluate what, how you're spending your time and what you're thinking and all that. So
I think it's constantly good to have those sort of perspectives and let them sort of poke into the tunnel vision of whatever you're doing and sort of make you pay attention to it at least. And I've spent quite a lot of time thinking about it. I think there are two things there. I think the first is the expression that youth is wasted on the young. Always seem that really it's an expression that bothers me a lot because it's sort of like saying the values that operate on one end of the spectrum should be shoved onto the other end of the spectrum.
Mm.
But there's something about being young that necessitates not having the things that are over here. That's the essence of what it is. In other words, if you were to say, all right, take values A from old people and stick them onto, or wisdom A from old people and stick them onto group B, this cohort of 13-year-olds, right? Whatever, who haven't developed their brain lobes, whatever.
Blowing ram horns at all hours of the day.
It's 3 p.m. They've all got their gyros and they're blowing ram's horns. So it's sort of like a Schrodinger's cat type of thing. Can you disrupt that equation? Can you disrupt that spectrum? Does it make sense to do that? Don't you have to have this experience of being naive and wasting time and floundering around in the world, developing your experience and learning that stoves are hot and girlfriends will break up with you if you don't behave? Don't you have to have the irresponsible youth in quotes in order to be here at this stage? And if you were to transplant the values from the wise to the young, then wouldn't that disrupt the end? And wouldn't these old people be saying, God damn it, I wish I'd been crazy and stupid when I was young? You know what I mean? Can you disrupt the measurement without affecting the result?
We would have a humanity that we wouldn't recognize. And also, when we think about that dynamic across time, it looks like a flat circle because there is no young, there is no old. It's all it's one body of humanity acting at the same time.
Yeah, if you think of a person as a single giant entity, it would be, instead of a head and feet, it would be 2 heads. That if you were to disrupt, it would be like, it wouldn't make sense, right? You have to have both ends of the spectrum in order for that person at the end of their life to say, oh, gee, I have so many regrets. I wish I'd paid more attention to my kids. I'm not saying that that's not right. I'm just saying it's something that I also think about when I hear things like that, and I watch Jingle All the Way, and I see how much Arnold Schwarzenegger feels regret about not paying more attention to his son. Maybe that's part of that equation that shouldn't be disrupted. Maybe that regret at the end of life is part of the whole thing somehow. I don't know.
Yeah, because if old people weren't saying those kinds of things, then, I mean, think about it. If one old person isn't saying that kind of thing in a span of whatever, then it's like, oh, that's kind of weird, but everybody else is, and we're used to it and all that kind of stuff. But then if all of a sudden all the old people stop saying that, then imagine what aspects of society would change. Imagine what commercials would no longer be on TV because they don't get money out of people's pockets. Then if that happens, imagine the ripple effect from that. Then what other ways would people try to find money? What other commercials would we see instead? And even that, the type of commercials we have on TV defines a culture, right? So even if the end result of old people stopping saying, oh, I wish I'd been crazy when I was young, is a change in the commercials that are on TV, well, even then, that would change things.
Right.
It would be a society we wouldn't recognize.
Right.
All of a sudden. So.
Right. And then you'd have different. Then you might have flip dynamics, and then we'd be having the opposite conversation. Those damn young wise people,
Yeah, and then if we could imagine completely the real narrative and the real existence that you and I have, seeing old people say, I wish I'd done this stuff when I was young, then they would be thinking we're weird, right? Because that reality where old people don't say that would think that they wouldn't recognize what we do. They wouldn't recognize, I mean, a little bit, yeah, but as much as we think a reality where old people aren't saying, I wish I'd done that when I was young, if the inverse were true, that old people weren't saying, the reality where old people aren't saying, I wish I'd done that where I was young. Does that make sense?
No. Try again.
Forget about it.
Meat.
God.
Can you try to say that one more time? I either
Yeah. Okay.
didn't understand. I'm too slow to understand what you said. So try to dumb it down a little bit for me, please.
So we've got two realities. We've got the reality that you and I know right now, where old people say, I wish I'd done that when I was young. And we think, oh, normal. How weird would it be? What kind of weird reality would we actually see if old people in this reality over here were saying, I don't care that, it's fine that I didn't do that when I was young,
Mm-hmm.
right? Now, how weird would these people over here, the people that are old and say, oh, I don't care that I didn't do that when I was young, how weird would our reality look to them, right?
Right.
So that's it. Much easier.
That's easy. I got it. I've got it. Yeah, I think it's sort of like, here's another example of the fractal thing. Things that are true at different levels. Do you know the double slit experiment? The famous
Is
double
that with
slit
photons?
Yes. Are you familiar with that?
Yeah, but I need a reminder for sure.
So if you have two slits and you're shooting photons through the two tiny slits,
Mm-hmm.
if you look at the pattern at the other end, then you see an interference pattern. Basically, you see the pattern you would see if there were water going through the two slits, or rather, waves of light. In other words, if there were photons going through both slits as waves of water, but instead they're waves of light, you would see the interference pattern. You know how if you have two sources of things agitating water, sometimes the troughs interfere, and so there's an interference pattern, and sometimes they add up, and so the waves are higher. So it's waves. It's waves.
Yeah.
So when you look at the paper at the other end of the two slits, you see a wave interference pattern, which only happens because there are waves.
Yeah.
But then when you try to measure which photon the light went through, which slit the photon went through, as soon as you do that, the pattern at the other end disappears. In other words, you try to figure out a way to watch which hole is it going through, because it's going through one hole or the other. As soon as you add measurement to it, then it breaks down, and you see just basically beeps all over the other end of the screen. The interference pattern disappears, and so what happens is basically because you've decided to try to figure out what's there, you've disrupted the whole phenomenon, and now you're part of the new phenomenon. So it's sort of like if we try to think about changing, or how to make the sort of the nature of maturity and the spectrum of maturity. If we try to think about regret and what it means to have regret, maybe the regret at the end of life, or not regret, or whatever, maybe that's all part of this thing. And if we try to foist these values on the other end of the spectrum, maybe that's going to create an analogous interference pattern, which is back to our good old theme of fractals.
Which I was going to say leads back to Eliade, in the sense that one of his assertions is that these people that lived in those sort of conservative societies where they were repeating the same patterns over and over again because they were sure of it, they felt that they were powerful, and therefore they were sacred to them. The only time they ever felt dissonance, or what Eliade calls sin, is when they didn't repeat that pattern. They did their own thing. They sort of got outside of that pattern. And so, and that's the time when they would experience profane time. They would experience history. And
which is a negative.
Which is what causes those negative feelings, the feelings like I'm not being effective, I'm not doing what's right, or what's powerful, or what's sacred, or what's holy.
Time spent away from the divine, and the divine is the pattern.
Yeah, that sounds like what would come out of that book. Yeah.
Okay.
And with these old societies, they always existed in that sacred time, and so they didn't really think about being young or being old. They didn't think about wasting away and that kind of thing, because it that's a very broad statement, but that's sort of the feeling that Eliade is trying to get across, is that when you live in that sacred way, the way he uses the term sacred, according to a clear understanding of reality, which is essentially what those people were doing, were thinking, oh, this is what the gods did. This is how reality works. This is how things operate. That when they operated according to that sacred method, they didn't think about, they didn't have this guilt, this sin, this idea of things being missed. Whereas we have that all the time, it seems. I mean, think about the neuroses in modern society and that kind of stuff.
Does that mean we are always in the profane? Our norm is the profane? Is that what that sort of suggests? That we exist in profanity?
Yeah, and that's one of Eliade's assertions, is that we exist more in that profane time all the time. And but one of the things that makes up for that, or that augments that, is the idea of faith. And I just finished the book where he mentions the idea of faith, which comes along with the Western Christianity and that kind of stuff. And so I honestly, to understand his point there, I need to read it again. But that idea that, if you exist in that sacred time, whether you're young or you're old, everything's right. I'm doing everything according to how it should be. This is how I understand it. I mean, I'm sure you've met, or older people that they don't seem to be as concerned about all the things they missed out on in their youth. They're almost joyful at their point. Yeah. Yeah. So they don't have the...
old people have a role in the family. They take care of the kids. The parents go off to work. There's a system.
Yeah, and that used to exist in the U.S. a lot more, I would imagine. I mean, just from thinking about my grandparents and all that. And so, and he says that people that existed with that, more of that idea of existing in sacred time and not questioning and thinking outside the box so much, is what allowed them to bear time, or deal with history. This awful thing is happening to me, but really the awful thing is happening because it's actually supposed to happen. This is what happened of course, this is how the world works. Of course it happened. And therefore it's not as big of a deal as somebody who thinks this shouldn't have happened. This is not the way things are supposed to go. This isn't how.
Right. It's like an arch. An arch, every piece of the arch reinforces itself. The whole thing stays in place because every other piece is in place.
Yeah.
The whole thing that's how arches work.
Yeah.
If you take out one piece, the whole thing collapses.
Yeah.
And so if you exist at the right point in your lifespan and everything else in society supports it and gives it meaning, then why would there be any regret? But when we live in a space where we don't know whether we should value our friendships or place emphasis on our careers, if I think about too much about my career, then I'm going to miss out on my kids' baseball game. But if I go to all my kids' baseball games, then I'm not going to make enough money to support my family, and I'm going to regret not trying to achieve my dreams. And we have to always be facing these dilemmas. And the fact that there's a dilemma should indicate that something is wrong, because what you're describing is no dilemma, a linear, not even linear, a single entity that is a human life as part of a social construct that's pretty clearly defined.
Yeah.
That has peaks and troughs and clearly defined roles. And it seems like we're sort of awash with choice and dilemma and uncertainty, and maybe no matter which choice you make, it's always wrong because choice exists, because it seems like, you know what I mean? Because think about it, if you spend all of your time with your family, will you regret not trying to become a professional golfer? Maybe.
So think of, here's an interesting parallel or connection. So sin entered the world, in the biblical tradition. Sin entered the world when Eve ate from the tree of knowledge, right? In a sense, that's when their eyes were opened. That's when their eyes were opened with the difference between good and evil.
Mm-hmm.
That's when their eyes were opened to choice.
Right.
They no longer lived only in that sacred time where they were only obeying in that very conservative way, only obeying the rules and the activities laid down in elo tempore by God to, if you do this, everything is going to be perfect. Just do this, just do this.
Yeah.
There was no choice. There was
Go
no
with the
free
flow,
will.
baby.
Yeah, and then you get the serpent aspect, the unknown, the chaotic aspect, the tempting aspect, which all of a sudden brought choice into the equation. Right?
Yep.
And so, because before that, there was no choice. It was just, yeah, just do this. Everything's grand. Everything is going exactly as it's supposed to. Everything is sacred. But then that choice came in, and then you had the breaking down into pairs of opposites, and you have to, I can have this, but I can't have that, but I want both, but I can only have one. Right? Kind of like, I want a career, but I want to have a family as well, but I can't do both, so I can only have one. So I'm going to have some type of regret because I can't have both at the same time.
Regret. Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
I feel like Jordan Peterson would want to get in on this conversation.
It's
kind of his area of giving sort of direction to people and living with meaning, but also drawing analogy, especially with Genesis. He's all about it.
Yeah, I know he read a lot of Eliade. So there's a lecture. I haven't listened to all the lecture of his, but he liked Eliade. Eliade's awesome. His ideas are so interesting, especially maybe for somebody like you that has a bent even more towards the scientific realm, that you probably spent more time with hard science and things like that. And I've probably spent more time with sort of the literature aspect of things. And I would guess, just because you talk about Carl Sagan and Feynman and physicists and scientists a lot more than you talk about poets.
I'm offended.
Even you, Luke.
This conversation has been good for my ego.
The points at which it's so easy to see where Eliade could open a door into physics and
a good a companion
astronomy. Oh man, it's so good. Yeah. So
I have an almost uncontrollable need to pee.
There was one other thing, just if I could mention one more thing.
One more thing, and I seriously do have to pee. Like,
okay, so at the end of the episode, when he goes back, when Russ goes into that school, he goes into the school and it's flooded, right? There's water everywhere, and there's all these statues of the Virgin Mary, mm-hmm. which are, I think, allusions to the idea of chaos, when everything was covered in water and nothing had form. And then also that mother goddess aspect, which, the chaos, the waters are often related to the mother goddess because females give birth, and then from that chaos, the form comes, and it's almost like it's a return to chaos, kind of like we were talking about. You've got all this water in the bayou threatening to overtake the cosmos, the land, the stuff that's clear, the boundaries that are clearly defined. So I just thought that was a cool visual at the end.
And then that sort of jives with the disrepair of the school itself. I mean, the school is in a mess as well. It's good imagery for sure. I wondered why he was walking through it slowly, though, if that's sort of his space that he's carved out for himself. Why does he seem to be exploring it? So maybe it's just for that imagery, just to sort of give us a sense of spookiness and grandeur before we see him playing with his toys.
I think it's a cool image. Cool little ending.
It's dope.